Captcha solving usually starts out as just a small one-off developer task, but at scale, it becomes a massive reliability, cost, and ownership problem. A dev just drops in a solving service, right? The workflow submits a task, pulls for a result, gets the response, and moves on. At low volume, that sounds incredibly simple. But when that workflow suddenly becomes a core piece of your daily operations, the whole equation changes. It's no longer just asking, hey, can this provider solve the CAPTCHA? The real, much more critical question is, can this workflow actually stay reliable, affordable, monitored, and clearly owned as our volume skyrockets? Because let's face it, when CAPTCHA solving fails, it rarely fails in a vacuum. It delays account checks, it clogs up QA workflows, blocks data collection, and can create a literal mountain of support tickets that nobody saw coming. So, welcome to today's Explainer. We're jumping deep into how you should be treating your CAPTCHA solver, not just as some throwaway script, but as a crucial production dependency. We're going to look at scaling these workflows and tools like CatMonster and Captcha AI to figure out exactly when and how you need to upgrade your solver infrastructure to handle real-world, massive volume. All right, let's take a quick look at our roadmap. We're going to cover the core scaling problem, outline the most common migration mistakes, break down the thread pricing model, look at expanded Captcha coverage, and finally, outline a genuinely safe migration workflow. Let's get right into it. Okay, Section 1, the scaling problem. Specifically, we need to talk about when per-solve billing actually becomes a major hurdle for your team. Before you go ripping out providers or cranking up your usage, you've got to step back and measure your monthly solve volume. Now, if your usage is pretty low, per-solve pricing might be totally fine. But if your volume is growing fast, your costs are going to scale directly with every single solve. And honestly, it's not just about the money. You absolutely have to track your solve latency. A solve can technically be marked as successful, but if it takes forever and holds up your downstream jobs, well, the negative impact on your business is super real, even if your success rates look perfect on paper. Moving on to Section 2. Let's look at CatMonster versus Captcha AI and highlight the 5 big mistakes you definitely want to avoid when you're evaluating options and migrating systems. When teams decide to migrate, they almost always fall into a few predictable traps. Mistake number 1 is choosing a provider just because their API looks super easy to use. Look, a simple integration absolutely does not guarantee reliability in production. Mistake 2 is migrating without any real monitoring in place. Mistake 3, only looking at the headline price. You have to remember the real cost of your system includes all the hidden stuff: retries, timeouts, maintenance, support escalations, and of course, really expensive engineering time. Mistake 4 is completely ignoring actual Captcha coverage. And finally, mistake 5 is moving all of your live traffic over at once instead of doing a gradual rollout. Just don't do it. That brings us to Section 3, the thread pricing model, and why measuring your peak concurrency is absolutely vital. When you're evaluating providers, you really need to understand how your specific system handles volume. Concurrency-based or thread-based pricing means you are sizing your system based on simultaneous in-flight tasks, rather than paying a tiny fee for every individual CAPTCHA solved. This is an absolute game-changer for high-volume pipelines where you need your costs to be locked down and fully predictable. Because the magic metric here isn't just some flat monthly number, it's your peak concurrency. Average volume just isn't enough data. Think about it. A workflow that slowly handles 1 million solves over an entire month behaves completely differently than a workflow that gets hammered with massive bursts in just a few hours. That burst capacity is your tipping point. It tells you whether tasks are going to queue up, slow down to a crawl, or just straight up time out when the pressure is really on. And when you start modeling out concurrency versus per-solve pricing across different volume tiers, the cost divergence becomes glaringly obvious. I get asked this all the time: is per-solve pricing always a bad idea? No, absolutely not. For low-volume workflows, it is highly practical. But once you shift to massive, highly predictable workloads, a threat-based model becomes structurally way cheaper and significantly easier to forecast for your finance team. Let's shift gears to Section 4, expanded Captcha coverage. Because scaling up almost always means you're going to start running into much tougher, highly specialized challenges. Ignoring coverage is such a common mistake when scaling. You absolutely must ensure your provider supports the exact puzzle types your workflow actually encounters out in the wild. Whether that's standard reCAPTCHA, turnstile, full-page Cloudflare challenges, or weird enterprise variants. And please, do not just measure all your failures as one giant generic number. You've got to break that data down by challenge type. Oh, and this is crucial. Remember to measure your retries.
Retries are sneaky. They often hide the true cost of failure because they eat up time, compute capacity, and engineering attention, even if the workflow does technically succeed in the end.
Finally, we're at section 5, the migration workflow. And the good news here is that changing your provider doesn't mean you have to burn down your app and rewrite the whole shebang from scratch. People panic and ask, is a provider migration going to be a total nightmare? Usually, no. The foundational control flow, where you submit a task, pull for the result, parse that response, and keep going, that stays exactly the same. That seriously reduces your engineering friction. The real heavy lifting is mostly just in mapping your fields, handling the new responses, rigorous testing, and keeping an eagle eye on your monitoring. So here are the actual steps for integration. Step 1, carefully map your fields between the old provider's API and the new one. Step 2, update your response parsing to actually read the new format. And step 3, get your metrics and monitoring dialed in. Honestly, it really is that straightforward to point your existing codebase over to the new API. When you compare the day-to-day request shapes, the core logic rarely sees a drastic change. You're basically just shifting from one JSON format to another and updating your parsing. So the technical friction is surprisingly low. But the need for hyper-diligent monitoring and clear governance during that switch, that is incredibly high. And whether you decide to go with a fully managed cloud solver or stick to self-managed infrastructure often just boils down to who owns the process. Managed setups take away the infrastructure headache, but listen, someone still has to monitor the workflow and sound the alarm if solve rates suddenly drop. Which leads us to the ultimate practical question that literally every IT manager or DevOps engineer is going to ask you. Hey, can I actually test this safely before we touch the live production system and route all of our traffic over? And the answer is absolutely yes. Doing a migration without metrics is basically just flying blind. You need to map the fields, test against real-world challenge types, monitor for failures, and then gradually route your traffic over. And this is vital. As your workflow scales up, you must ensure this automated solving is only ever running in owned, client-authorized, or strictly contractually permitted environments. Define exactly where it's allowed, who gave the green light, and log every bit of that activity. You have to treat Captcha solving like the core business system it has evolved into. So I'll leave you with this to think about. Looking at your own automation pipeline today, who actually owns your Captcha workflow? And what happens to your entire business when it unexpectedly breaks?